All right, so our next speaker here is AJ Yawn, and AJ is on a mission to make compliance suck less through automation. He's the co-founder, CEO of ByteChek, and having worked with a number of founders over the years, one characteristic of some of the best founders I've seen is that they've actually lived the pain that they're trying to solve. And AJ has done just that, helping organizations with their compliance programs. And now he's going to share in a moment how that relates to the cloud in particular. AJ, over to you.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Frank. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here presenting today. Definitely not taking this lightly. This event is rare to see this many other leaders in the space that look like me, educating the community, and then also to see how many of you that joined today. I personally think the future of cloud security looks a lot like the people speaking here today. So I'm honored and just humbled to be a part of this. Thank you, Sands, and everyone behind the scenes that allowed us to do this. Let's get started. So I'll be discussing automating security on AWS today. Frank gave a great intro. So a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder and CEO at ByteChek, a cybersecurity SaaS company focused on automating cybersecurity compliance assessments. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for a little over a decade, about half of that time in the US Army as a commissioned officer. I left after earning the rank of captain, have a few certs, sit on a few professional association boards, including the National Association of Black Compliance and Risk Management Professionals, and a proud graduate of Florida State University and Georgetown University. But enough about me, let's get into it. So what's security automation? We hear it a lot, we've heard it a lot today. And it's kind of, become like a catch-all word or a catchphrase here in the field. And this definition here sums it up pretty well. But from a human perspective, let's think about that. Let's think about security automation from a human perspective, because it's always important to consider the humans behind the technology or the automation. So we're talking about the cybersecurity personnel that are responsible for securing these assets and data. They're the ones that are benefiting from security automation. And when you think about automation, thinking about programmatically detecting, investigating, remediating cyber threats, that allows security professionals to get back to doing what they were hired to do, which is critically think and solve problems. And MK mentioned this earlier in his talk about automation takes you out of doing those mundane routine tasks. And that's exactly what it's all about. None of us who work in security, none of us were hired to do mundane routine tasks. We were hired to think. We were hired to use our knowledge of the industry to go out and find what's going on, go out and see why are things happening, not to just enable MFA 20 times every time a new user shows up. So security automation allows you to do that. And oftentimes you hear folks in other industries and early on in cybersecurity thinking that automation is going to take people's jobs. I think it's the opposite, especially in cybersecurity. Automation is going to allow us to get back to doing what we were hired to do, get back to thinking, get back to being more proactive from a security standpoint. The other benefit for the individuals in the field is quality of life. You can sleep a lot better, have a lot less stressful events if security is automated. A lot of breaches that you hear about, especially in the cloud on AWS, were just misconfigurations that a human made. Maybe not intentional, maybe it was unintentional, but they were just simple misconfigurations that you could have automated that risk away. So the technical stuff on this slide is definitely important, and we're going to get pretty technical or fairly technical in this conversation, but it's always important to consider the humans behind these decisions we're making, and especially from a security automation standpoint, it's going to improve the lives of the people that we're working with. And specifically on AWS today, which is what we'll be talking about in this section, it's important to understand the foundation of what security is. AWS defines security as protecting information, systems, and assets while delivering business value through risk assessments and mitigation strategies. Now that's a mouthful, and we're going to dive deeper into the security pillar. But before we do, I want to briefly talk about the well-architected framework. The well-architected framework is really a great resource if you're learning anything about AWS. It was designed to help cloud architects make informed decisions about their architecture in a cloud-native way. It's important to say that part, in the cloud-native way, because this well-architected framework talks about how to do things using AWS services, how to use cloud-related services, which is where I would encourage anyone to start. If you're trying to do something on the cloud, a lot of mistakes that you heard about earlier as people were migrating in the panel, you heard those mistakes of people migrating to the cloud. And what happens oftentimes is folks try to take their same on-prem infrastructure and just replicate it in the cloud. not identifying ways that the cloud has been designed to make those things more efficient or easier. So the well-architected framework is a great tool to use. AWS makes it clear that this is not an audit tool. This is just to encourage a constructive conversation around what are these architectural decisions that you're making. And there's obviously trade-offs, right? If you are operating in a dev environment, you might sacrifice reliability so that you can reduce your costs. You might not need your dev environment to be up all the time. Or maybe you're e-commerce, right? And you need performance efficiency to be at its highest level because your customers demand that. You can say, I'm going to pay whatever to get that. And those are some of the trade-offs, but there's two trade-offs you should never make: security and operational excellence. And AWS agrees there. That's what they say. That's not just an AJ-ism. And I think everyone here would agree as well. You should never trade off security. So what does security mean on AWS? Within the well-architected framework, you're going to have this security pillar. And the security pillar focuses on the ability to protect information and systems across these 5 areas of concern. So who can do what with identity and access management, detecting security events with detective controls, protecting systems with infrastructure protection, the confidentiality and integrity of data, and then responding to security events. Now, everybody here that's listening to this, we're all interested in security or working in security. And all of these areas are going to look very familiar to us, right? AWS isn't doing anything groundbreaking. We all have seen identity and access management, detective controls, data protection, et cetera. But there's something that you should think about when you're examining these 5 focus areas on AWS. You should think about these as an integrated component of the security program, not individual siloed processes. There's a lot of overlap through these all, and security requires you to go across these different focus areas to do things effectively. An example of this is with the detective controls and incident response focus areas. As you detect an incident or potential security event, this automatically feeds that incident response process. And this graphic shows how one service, AWS Cloud Shell, covers both of those areas. And there's a number of other services that are like that. But the important takeaway here is that this security pillar and these different focus areas of the cloud, while they're familiar to us in a traditional on-prem environment, these are all interrelated components. You have to touch every single one of them, and all of them have to talk to each other to do security effectively on the cloud. I do want to highlight some of the different security services you see here listed for each focus area. And this is just a testament to some of the work that AWS has done from a security perspective. Jarek just mentioned that AWS comes out with a new service almost every day. They probably are coming out with a new service as we're talking here. And that's not a joke, it seems like it. And that's why I focused only on learning AWS for the better half of my career, because it's just so much changing. There's so much changing that you have to stay up to date with one. But one of the things to talk about here is I wasn't even able to list nearly even half. I don't think this is even half of the security services on AWS. There's so many services available that were designed specifically to solve cloud security problems in your environment. So I think it's worth for anyone, I'm technically, I guess, a third-party vendor, but don't look at third-party vendors first. Look on AWS first and see what you can do natively, because these services were built to solve security problems on the cloud for you. And there's a number of them. There's a number of security services that do a bunch of different functions that are great to dive into. So now that we kind of have the overview of what security means on AWS, we talked about the well-architected framework, we talked about the security pillar, and gave an overview of security automation. Let's talk about 2 ways that we really should be thinking about this on AWS when we're talking about automating security. The first is going to be an event-driven incident response system, and the other is going to be something you heard before as well, which is security guardrails. And with an event-driven response system, it's a detective mechanism, and there's services such as CloudTrail, Config, Security Hub, and it will trigger that responsive mechanism. And you have other services like AWS Config Auto Remediation, Systems Manager, AWS Lambda, that will go out and remediate those events. And that's a lot of words, and I'm going to show you here a demo here in a second. But the idea for event-driven response, incident response, is to reduce the time to value between detective mechanisms and responsive mechanisms. And this is a metric that every security team professional, they care about. How do I reduce the time between when I found an incident and when I was able to respond to it? Everybody here in this session understands that in the security world, it's not a matter of if you will be breached, it's a matter of when. And at least that's the mindset you should have. You should not be building your environment thinking you won't have a negative or a bad actor come into your environment. So when you think about that and you understand that it's inevitable for most organizations, regardless of industry, I think we all saw last year that a breach can impact any organization, regardless of their maturity, size, sector, government, financial, whatever. There's been breaches that have impacted all of those different areas. And it's important that you should understand, all right, this probably is going to happen to my organization. So with that in mind, we should work on understanding and ensuring that when an incident happens, we can respond to it in the shortest time possible. And that's the key to event-driven incident response, is how do I go from I saw something bad happen to we need to fix it. And maybe we can fix it automatically, and we'll get into that. And on AWS, really, I guess just in the cloud in general, right, across any other cloud provider, misconfigurations are easy because it's so easy to create new resources. You can literally do it with a few commands in the console. The reason why I'm doing this presentation in a browser is so that I can pop over to the CLI and into the console for a demo. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to create a new S3 bucket. It's very simple to do this with just a one line, be able just to go ahead and spin something up, which means misconfigurations will happen, right? And humans are human. Last I checked, we haven't been able to build a perfect human. So we should stop saying humans are the weakest link. We know that. It's one of the laziest excuses, I think, in cybersecurity, is that humans are the weakest link. Cool, we understand that. So let's stop blaming humans for things that we can prevent. We can prevent a lot of these mistakes by automating this, by having an event-driven security so that we can protect ourselves from ourselves, right? We know that humans are going to be human. We know that they're going to make mistakes. So let's automatically respond to those mistakes in a manner that makes sense. And secondly, we're going to talk about automating security using guardrails. And we're going to focus on AWS organizations and service control policies, but guardrails go well beyond this. There are other services such as AWS Control Tower and Landing Zone. I'm also going to show you how to use identity and access management policies to implement some multi-factor authentication guardrails. You heard Jarek talk about it. You heard MK talk about it. Multi-factor authentication is table stakes. Get that done. Get it fixed. And I'm going to show you today how to do it using IAM policies, where you can implement something so that whenever a user logs into your AWS environment, if they didn't authenticate with MFA, guess what? They can't get in. They're not allowed to, well, they can get in, sorry. They will be able to log in, but they won't be able to do anything else. The only thing they'll be able to do is enable MFA. I don't care if they're an admin or whatever their permissions are. You can set this policy so that unless you authenticate with multi-factor authentication, you can't do anything. So now you can go back to focusing on what you need to do as your job. So security guardrails, they enable you to set these basic restrictions to prevent those misconfigurations. And think of these as bumpers you used to get when you go bowling, or maybe you still get those if you go bowling. No matter how bad of a bowler you are, you're still going to hit those pins, right? You're going to bump back and forth, and the bumpers stop the ball from going in the gutters. That's what guardrails do in the cloud. They give your team the ability to move quicker, safer, because misconfigurations are easy. And if we know that, we can implement these guardrails to protect from humans, who we're going to get rid of that humans are the weakest link excuse. And we're going to solve for that problem by implementing these guardrails. So before I go to the next slide, which is going to be talk about S3, I do want to give an example over here in the browser. So what you guys are seeing here, and the reason why I'm in the browser again, is so that I can use AWS Cloud Shell and show some examples in the console here. And AWS Cloud Shell is a browser-based pre-authenticated shell that you can launch directly from the management console. It's a great way to get some practice with the AWS CLI. And the reason I'm in the CLI is because I want to show you all how easy it is to create something and to create it in the wrong way. So I'm going to create a new bucket right here, a new S3 bucket. And we talked about S3 buckets, and I'll talk a little bit about it next. And this bucket I just created there, and we'll see that it's listed here across these other buckets. You see, this is the bucket I just created. Now let's take a look at some of the configurations there that are just kind of natural, right? This is just me coming out, creating the bucket directly into the browser. And I want to see, is the bucket encrypted? Was it encrypted? And we're seeing here that server-side encryption configuration was not found. So I created a bucket. I'm not encrypting data at rest. What does right look like in a bucket like this? In a bucket like this, we should be seeing that the bucket is actually encrypted, right? Encryption by default's on, and that's this other bucket here that was already in our account, already had that status on there. What about the public access? You know, we see all the time that public buckets cause issues, and we should make sure that none of our buckets are public. So let's check to see if this bucket has public access block. And this is the cool thing about the CLI that you guys, and about doing a live demo, is mistakes happen. There we go. I fixed it up, and I'll move that up so you all can see that, but there's no such public access block configuration enabled on this bucket. And I'm gonna go ahead and show you what write should look like here. And we should see that all of these ACLs are in place on these buckets. So again, you can see very clearly how easy it was for me to create a bucket with just this one line. And that bucket was created wrong. You know, I didn't do the right things that I was supposed to do. So we're back in the slide deck, and I'm going to explain to you how to fix these things. You know, we know misconfigurations are going to happen. If you do a Google search of S3 bucket breaches, you're going to spend a few hours reading the countless articles of some of the largest organizations in the world who had their S3 buckets breached. If you're watching the replay of this on YouTube, press pause, go search those S3 buckets, and then come back and join us. And your eyes are gonna be open to see why is this even still happening. And for those that don't know, S3 stands for Simple Storage Service. It's a object storage service on AWS that allows you to store basically anything with infinite storage capabilities. It's one of the oldest AWS service. And I found that a lot of organizations, when they're first moving to the cloud, S3 is where they kind of kick things off. And they store a lot of sensitive data in these buckets. So these breaches are pretty impactful. And this slide that we're looking at here shows you how you can use these AWS services to automatically detect an S3 bucket that's not encrypted at rest and that's public. And you can do that using AWS Config. AWS Config is a really powerful service. I saw someone mention it earlier in Jarek's hallway, and it's just a service you should get familiar with. It's going to go out and record compliance status, record the resources, configuration status of your resources. You can see over time how those resources change. And when you talk about visibility in the cloud, AWS Config is a great service for that. And now AWS Config is going to record the compliance status, and you can use this auto remediation rules on AWS Config to go out and automatically fix those S3 buckets, go out and enable encryption, go out and fix the public access that happened. And I'll show you in the console here at the end of the talk how, as I'm talking, AWS Config is going to go fix that bucket that I created. And this is all without human intervention. A big, humongous issue on the cloud is S3 buckets. So why not just go ahead and solve for this from the beginning? Say every time that a bucket's created, whether or not you encrypt it, whether or not you prevent it from being public, we're going to make sure that this happens on the back end. One of the things that's cool with this service as well is communication. When you're talking about incident response, event-driven incident response, you have to be able to communicate. And this is where you can get back to your security team. Automation allows you to get back to thinking, get back to critically thinking. So you can have an SNS or simple notification service, send out a message via email, Slack, or any other medium really you can do. And now your team can go find out and say, why did this happen? Who did this and why did he do it? Why was AJ logging into the Cloud Shell and creating these new S3 buckets that weren't encrypted at rest? And you can go have a conversation about it. And this is a very simple example, but if the many organizations who suffered S3 buckets implemented this configuration, they might have saved a lot of money, time, and some reputational damage. So this is just an important way that you can go out and fix something from an event-driven security perspective that causes a lot of people issues. Now we'll talk about guardrails, and then we'll pop back in and do a few demos before we wrap up here. And AWS organizations is what we're going to talk about when we talk about guardrails. Organizations is a powerful tool that you can organize resources across multiple accounts. And I hear from a lot of startups, a lot of people, and there's probably somebody right now who just thought when I said multiple accounts, but I only have one account. Why do I need multiple accounts? Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you today that's wrong. That setup is bad security practice because your blast radius of an incident dramatically increases if all of your resources, all of your users, everything are in one account. If a user who's breached is also, you can get into your dev application or your production application is in there, that's going to cause an issue into your entire organization, or maybe they can get into your billing as well. So you want to segment out your different resources, and I have an example here across multiple accounts. And the way that you manage that so that it's not a nightmare and you're not sitting there managing multiple accounts is using AWS organizations. It helps you to manage and maintain this multi-account setup. Within AWS organizations, you have a root account, which is your billing account. There should be no resources there. There really should be no users there. It's really just to get your consolidated billing up. And that's another feature of AWS organizations where you can get consolidated billing. So you only have one bill. Your finance team really is going to live in this account up top. As you can see the little money symbol there. And the other accounts that need to be created will be nested under what we would call organizational units. Now, an organizational unit, or OU, is a logical grouping of accounts in your AWS organization. OUs enable you to organize your accounts into a hierarchy and make it easier for you to apply management controls. And when you're building out your organization setup and your guardrail setup here, the key thing to think about is, how do I reduce the operational overhead of managing this structure? So you should consider, how am I going to group these accounts? The OUs allow you to organize accounts based on functions, which allows you to then apply these common policies, which SCPs there stands for service control policies. So when you're thinking about how to organize my accounts, don't think about how does my org chart look? Let me put this organization here, this organization there. You should be thinking about it based on function or common set of controls so that you can make decisions on your service control policies about what has to go where. And these service control policies are what you would use to apply those controls. A service control policy defines the AWS service actions, such as EC2 described instances that you can run in your organization account. Or you can also use service control policies to say, I only want my team to work out of the US East 1 region. I don't have no reason for anybody to be in other regions, so I'm only going to have my team work out of the US East 1 region. And that can prevent you from having someone hijack your account and start doing some Bitcoin mining in a random region, and you don't find out about it until you get your bill. That's a real scenario that I've seen. So SCPs are powerful, and they allow you to really put in those guardrails and say, hey, you can only do these things. And we'll talk a little bit more about SCPs in a second. So the way that this account is set up, we have 5 accounts. There's other folks out there in the industry. There's a resource I'll share at the end of this from Scott Piper, AWS Security Roadmap, that he suggests you have at least 3 accounts. It really doesn't, I think the minimum should be 3, but I'll explain to you what these 5 accounts are here that I recommend as best practice. 1, you should have a security account. That's where all your logs, your security alerts, your security services, all of that's stored there. It's limited to the security team and really only people that need access to that security information. And that's segmented out away from your production, away from your users, et cetera. The other account that I would have in this security OU is your people account. This is where all your users live. This is where all those users, that's really only thing that's there. You should just have user accounts, no instances, no databases, no nothing else, so that if a user is breached, the account that's compromised is only users. They can't do anything. They can't go out and mess anything up, and you can use service control policies to control that. And you should make sure that everybody's required to use MFA, and to access the other accounts, they're going to use cross-account access roles to do that, and you can control those permissions at the account level. You should have a dev OU. That's where testing and all that other stuff happens, and that should be really segmented from your production environment. There's a lot of compliance frameworks out there that will require you to do that. The other thing that you should have here is a prod OU, and this is where all your application data lives and all your sensitive data is stored. And that's really should be super segmented over there, nothing in there. Limit and lock that down as much as you can. The account that I'm going to show you is in an AWS organization, and I put it in a prod OU, and I have a service control policy on it that says that we can only do things in the US East 1 region. So we're going to take a look at what that means, but the cool thing about SCPs are they're going to help you ensure your accounts stay within your access and control guidelines. You can apply that at scale. But the thing to remember about SCPs are that they're not sufficient to grant, not alone are sufficient to grant permissions to the accounts in your organization. Technically, no permissions are granted by an SCP. The SCP defines a guardrail or sets limits on the actions the account can perform or delegate to the IAM users. But you still have to attach an IAM policy to the users, the roles, the machines, whatever it is that's doing anything on AWS. Everybody that is familiar with AWS understands identity and access management controls everything. That's the only way you can do anything on AWS. So when you combine SCPs and you combine IAM policies, what you can do kind of sits right there in the middle. So we're going to take a look at a few guardrails here in the demo. And I think, what's important to do here in an AWS talk, because it helped me out so much when I was learning, to just visualize what's going on here. So I'm logged in as an AJ MFA user. If we pop over here to the console, you're going to see the only difference between these two accounts are that one has MFA enabled and the other doesn't. And if we look inside this group here, we're going to see that there's two permissions applied to this particular group. The admin policy, which says I can do anything, and then the force MFA policy, which says that unless this user has MFA enabled and unless this user logged in with MFA, they can't do anything else. So I'm going to pop over to that other user that you all saw, the AJ no MFA user, and you can see I'm logged in here. I didn't have MFA enabled. What happens when I try to go to the EC2 console? I can't see anything. Why is that? And then let's see, maybe I should go to Cloud Shell and I can open up a shell. And again, I can't do anything. The reason being, if we pop back over to the permissions, is this force MFA policy that says, unless the user logs in with MFA, it doesn't matter what their permissions are. It doesn't matter what their IAM policies are. They have to log in with MFA. They have to start over and go enable their MFA. That's a way right there that you take away the issues or the problem with MFA and allow your people to get back to doing what they're supposed to do, get back to thinking. And in this account that we're in right now, we're in what I mentioned earlier, that prod account, right? We're in that prod account. We're in that prod OU. We're in that account that I said we can only do things in US East 1. We were only in the US East 1 region. So I'm going to pop back over to the command line as well, just to show you all something real quick here. I'm going to run this quick command that essentially is doing exactly what I'm doing over there in the EC2 console, but I'm going to say I want to do it in US East 1. All right. I misspelled describe again. There we go. All right. So we can see the instances there. Now I'm going to clear that. And what happens if I try to run that same command in US East 2? Remember, I have a service control policy around this account that says, unless you're in US East 1, you can't do anything. So let's take a look at US East 2 here in the console as well, so you all can visualize this. This service control policy combined with my IAM policies, my IAM policies say I'm an admin. Great, I'm an admin. But then you look at the service control policy and it says only people can do things in the US East 1 region. So when I'm in the US East 2 region, I can't even see instances. I cannot do anything over here because I'm in the wrong region. And that's just, again, a way that you can do so many things with service control policies to limit what's going on here in this account. And lastly, we'll finish up to go take a look at that S3 bucket that we created from the beginning. And then we'll hop back over to the slides. Hopefully, I think I have a little bit of time left. So you remember I created this sans demo 123 S3 bucket, and now that bucket's not public. If you all remember from the beginning of the talk, when I created it, it was public. And the only thing that changed here is that AWS Config went out and decided that this was not meeting the configurations we had set in this account. So it went out and fixed it. Now encryption's enabled on this bucket. Now the bucket's not public anymore. So a breach that was preventable, that you can go and Google a bunch of those, could be fixed by just enabling some event-driven incident response here, where you can go out and see this bucket was created, it was public, it wasn't encrypted, but you can tell config to go fix it, and then send you a message and say, hey, you should look into why AJ's over there doing bad things. So let's finish up talking about the benefits, and I think we'll have a little bit for some questions here. The biggest thing, again, you want to reduce that time between detection and response. And reducing that time is top of mind for every security professional. You want that number to consistently go down. You want to be able to say, I found the incident, I knew it was bad, and I fixed it. And you can walk into an organization, especially if they're hosted on AWS on day one, and do this. You can get that going from the beginning if you're able to set this up. The other thing is, we know people are going to make mistakes. We know that hackers might breach your account. We know that a person might do something wrong. So let's protect against those things. The third thing here, we have enough information out there about what good security looks like, right? What is security that is supposed to be effective look like on AWS? There's a lot of information out there about that. There's a lot of white papers, a lot of content out there for people to find. So we know what the basics are. Go out and enforce those at scale. If you know that your organization has no need for S3 buckets to be public, or maybe you do have a need for one S3 bucket to be public, which you can still use this rule to fix that by exempting out buckets, but you can go out and say, you know what, we're going to be secure from that thing. We're not going to be 100% secure because that doesn't exist in the interconnected world we live in, but we at least know that multi-factor authentication won't be an issue, or our public S3 buckets won't be an issue. The other thing is increase the productivity, the quality of life of your security teams. People want to think. People don't want to do routine tasks. You were not hired to sit in front of your computer and click one button all day to check if people had an MFA. You were hired to research, to think, to operate, and to be out there being that true security professional. And that's what automation will do for you. And lastly, Devsecops. It's a buzzword in our industry, but it's real. And if your org hasn't implemented or adopted a DevSecOps philosophy, because DevSecOps is all about the mindset, it's not about the technology, it's about how you're thinking about security, and you're hosting on AWS, start with some of these things we talked about. Start with implementing some of these basic responses, guardrails, and security will begin to shift left. There's a lot more to do with DevSecOps, but this is a great way to adopt that mentality early on. So this was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed this opportunity, appreciated the chance. I hope you all learned a little bit from this session. And I have a few challenges for you to dive deeper and some resources. So if you have access to a production AWS environment, go out and talk to the right people. If it's you, implement AWS organizations, automate multi-factor authentication, automate the protection of those S3 buckets. Those are the basics, right? Go out and get that done. If you're not in a role where you can do that, that's perfectly fine. The cool part about AWS is you can learn for free. Go create a free account and go out and test this out. I think Dominique mentioned it earlier in our panel, don't learn in silence or don't be quiet about what you're learning. Go out, create a free account, take exactly what we talked about here, implement it, and then go scream about it on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever is your social network of choice, because other people need to know what you know. We always talk about networking. It's about who you know. It's not about who you know. It's about who knows you and what do they know that you know. If I know you and I don't know what you know, I can't help you. So go scream and tell people what you know. The resources listed below are great resources to dive deeper into the topics that I covered. I really enjoyed this. Grateful for everyone that has attended. I'll be in the Slack channel for the rest of the day if anyone would like to chat and get to know me or discuss anything covered in this session. I think we have a 10-minute break before Shanisha talks about the multi-layered approach to secure cloud identity. Thanks for everyone. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for the team. Let's make sure the future of cybersecurity looks a lot like the individuals speaking and leading at this conference.
Hey, that was awesome, AJ. That was great. Got a lot of kudos in the Slack channel here for your live demos and your awesome knowledge. We do have time for a couple of questions here, so I did want to ask you here in terms of rating risk. There's a question on, hey, how do you think about this? What would you rate higher? Cloud misconfigurations, regulatory compliance? How do you think about that?
Oh, it's let's throw compliance out. Don't rate risk based off of compliance, and I'm the compliance guy. Rank them based off of the security in your organization. So good security is contextual. You have to have context around what you're doing in security. So maybe you have a website that has some images on it. You need to store it in a public S3 bucket. Don't go out and implement that rule that I just said, because now no one will be able to see the images on your website, or implement it differently. So you have to think about risk and security from the context of your organization and what type of organization you are, but don't consider compliance. Just focus on security. Compliance will work itself out. That's actually a problem, I think, in the industry. Too many people focus on compliance and then they're just checking a box instead of focusing on security first, and then compliance is the result that follows.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. You showed the power of secure service control policies, SCPs, and how it can prevent you from executing stuff in another region. What are some other examples? The question here is of what else you can do with SCPs, and is there anything related to detecting what users shouldn't be doing in your environment?
Yeah, with SCPs, it's pretty powerful. The list is endless. You can actually say, I only want a specific type of EC2 instance with this specific AMI to be launched, or I only want you to use these 5 services. And when we're talking about like that people account, I could use an SCP and say the only service that people can use in this account is IAM. They can't use EC2, they can't use S3, they can't use RDS. So then even though you have this user account, if someone's breached, if that account's breached, they can't even go out and do anything bad. They literally can only use IAM. So SCPs are pretty powerful. From a detection standpoint, you're going to want to make sure CloudTrail is enabled at the organization level. You're having all of those logs flowing into your security account. And then you can combine a number of services on AWS between config, detective, and a number, and CloudTrail honestly is the most powerful when it comes to users doing something on your account, because every API call, whether in the console or CLI, is logged. So definitely CloudTrail is one of those table stakes services you should have in place.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks again, AJ. Everybody, let's give him a virtual round of applause here.